In the city of Pittsburgh, when I was growing up, television had something called speak out messages. They were short, running about 60 seconds long. Everybody saw them at the dinner table and so on. Well, when I put out a speak out message for my friends, it should be noted that anyone can watch them, and probably nobody will. But they're out there, and the basis of my sales pitch, so to speak, why you might want to hear what I have to say is that although I have no children and I'm deaf, and it's stunning to me to hear of people having $25,000 a year to live on. I don't have 10. I'm 61 years old. I have seen the United States of America. I have ridden the buses. I have seen my fellow citizens sleeping on the streets. I've seen the tent cities. I've been in libraries. I've watched as government tried and sometimes failed to protect us from ourselves. And I went to Pittsburgh Public Schools, saw the bullying, the violence, saw the cowardly attempts to ridicule idealism. And I'm moved, deeply touched by the movement in the world today to solidify the planet around awareness of the need for mutual protection over climate change and refugee assistance, food, water, medicine, shelter, climate resistant shade structures, scientific studies of preservation, limiting the toxins that are entering our environment. I want to say something that might be helpful towards that end. My father was a writer about the institution of public schools. He had a book called Humanizing the School, which was about inspiring conscientious involvement, what Richard Meneng called innovative volunteerism. People who rise to the occasion and do the best with whatever they can secure to help their communities in our commonwealth. The planet is everyone's commonwealth. I know what the reasons for developmental, philosophical, economic, psychology were that gave rise to the friction of ideological systems and ultimately the mania for largesse and accumulation. I'm not stick at naught about those things. I've read The Fountainhead and find a lot about it really very admirable. I find it a waste of time to go banging on one side or the other about ideologies, the dialectics of property. Everybody knows what it is to respect property, and everybody knows what it means to steal. When it comes to schools, proper foundations, teaching history, teaching math, English, writing, sciences, we need to include ecology. And we need to surround ourselves with people who can understand field trips to demonstrate for students what it is we know, what it is we don't know, what it is we're doing right, and what it is that we're not doing right. And to learn how to explore and present ideas that we've come to learn about and understand through projects where students stand up in front of the class and give background and research opinions. Because it's not just a question of effectively being able to research. A lot is invested in the ability to communicate effectively and work with others. And knowing when to protect yourself from work that has been discredited. We know why the fossil fuel industry was gluttonous, and we know why it has to stop. And these are works for research, for civil education, for historians. They're important. They're not to be neglected. We mustn't let climate change become a steamroller that squashes everything else of importance. But I admire the people who've taken Fridays off and said the problem isn't that we're doing too much, it's that we're not doing anything at all to protect our environment. This has to change. I've said many times that a program, voluntary but remunerated, um, sabbatical for revision of teacher preparation to include online seminars developed by the World Wildlife Fund, by NASA, with the sponsorship of the US government, additional teacher training with time off with pay to learn what needs to be included in the curriculum. It should have been done by now. President Biden, please consider it. So when we look at the history of schools, you don't need to go very far. You can check out books by my father on the foundations of modern education. Humanizing the School was about curriculum reform to make it more friendly to people of all races. Curriculum reform is a work in progress. We talk about Congress and legislation. We should be as adept and loquacious on the subject of curriculum reform. We need to include curriculum reform in our conversations about climate change. We need to include curriculum reform in our discussions about adaptation and mitigation. It's the essence of eco cities. And there's precedents for this kind of reform. The busing movement, which caused a lot of problems at first, integration of schools, fair housing acts come from an era where curriculum reform was one of the ways to address racism. We need to include curriculum reform in our attempts to protect each other from the arrogance and foolishness of polluting industries. When I was young, sad to say, I suggested a greenhouse at our school. It was just shrugged off like a ridiculous person. Dostoevsky has this book called The Dream of the Ridiculous Man. I used to write poems with titles like that, describing for myself the constant taunting that I came up against because I had really been disconnected from the world around me by trauma and violence and cruelty. And I could see blinking through the pandemonium and coma the need to connect with nature and love in the beauty of our surroundings. In Pittsburgh, Shenley Park was a wonderful place to walk. It became a form of therapy for me. And I wrote The Heaven Odyssey, which was about children who were unafraid of bees and would play in the garden with them. Sensitive and understanding children in a world of musical beings. The planet, sister planet that was once where now stands our moon, it was just a response to the terrible trauma inflicted on me by violence. And what evolved was an explanation. Nobody sat down with me when I was too young to really understand and said, you're going to be around a long time. What they did instead was they slaughteringly attacked me and said, you'll be lucky if you live to see tomorrow. They didn't say you're going to be around to be 90. You want to choose wisely. Your heart is attenuated to your sentience. Don't stand for cheapening of personal relations. Nope, that's not what they did. They built a shack of science and pushed me in it and battered me and said, what's the matter? Like, so that they could steamroll their brainwashing pseudo education about sex, drugs, and rock and roll on a treasure course and call it an ecological demonstration project when they towed out a Trojan war game called Two Virgins and clocked these nauseating social attacks that threaten our schools now, even in the fall when we're hoping to get back to normal. We're faced with monkeypox now. And the commercials in those old days, they'd put up about Mutual of Omaha. I loved seeing the lemurs of Madagascar. They were beautiful, friendly, lovely creatures, threatened by drought now. But they would have two guys, every time. They'd rope up a crocodile and leash up a mountain lion and take them out to the woods to watch them fight. And they call this a study in nature. Don't fall for it. I believe that the wolves left into Yellowstone, as I heard, helped equalize the natural balance. And I think that there's something to be said for that kind of thing. But don't let them turn it into a metaphor for poaching in the human race in order to thin the tribe. When they refuse to even reform the educational process and teach people eloquently what it is they're on about, because they don't want people to adapt. They just want to bump them off. They want to kick as many people off as they can, get away with based on the logic of their showdown of cosmology over ecology. They're killdozers, and they're awfully smarty pants. These scientists knew about flame over Africa back in the 50s, probably the 1920s, maybe even the 1890s. And they said, ha, 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 we'll teach those idealists. They think they're going to build civilization. Ha, ha, ha. Wait till the new Vikings come. We can get a handle on these things through education and knowledge and humane science. We really can. But there are enemies to that idea. They've been around a long time. They used to throw rocks at school buses. They used to torture me. They used to turn cars over and steal them and write scripts about the queer ball and get bush trotting out and saying, where were you stroking a moon rock, Curry? These people aren't friends of the future. They're controllers from nightmare broth of 50s detachment who watch and vindicate themselves by seeing others suffer while they laugh. Don't go that road.